Al Capone. I mean, the name itself is legendary, right? For a few incredible years, he wasn't just a gangster. He was more powerful than the mayor of Chicago, more famous than a movie star, and just seemed completely untouchable. He was a brutal crime lord who somehow became an American icon.
And that brings us to the big question, the one that kept law enforcement up at night. Witnesses were terrified to talk, the police were on his payroll, and for years, he built this massive criminal empire right out in the open. So how on earth did they finally take him down?
Well, you might think it ended in some big, dramatic shootout, right? No, the answer wasn't a hail of gunfire. It was something way quieter, and honestly, a lot more brilliant. It all came down to a paper trail.
Okay, so let's get into it. Before we talk about the fall, we've got to understand the rise. I mean, how does a kid from Brooklyn become the undisputed king of Chicago's entire criminal underworld?
And man, did it happen fast. He was born in 1899, but his school days were over by age 14 when he got kicked out for slugging a teacher. By 1919, he's in Chicago learning the business from a top crime boss. And then, after an attempt on his mentor's life, Capone gets handed the keys to the whole kingdom. He's just 26 years old.
It's around this time he picks up that famous nickname. But, it wasn't from some legendary gunfight. It was way less glamorous. It came from a bar fight after he insulted a woman and her brother took a knife to his face. He absolutely hated being called Scarface and would always try to hide the scars in photos.
All right, so Capone's in charge now, and Chicago is about to change, big time. He had this wild way of ruling the city. It was this mix of just pure violence on one hand and this strange kind of public kindness on the other.
And this was his whole public pitch. You can almost hear him saying it, right? He didn't see himself as a criminal. During Prohibition, he saw himself as a service provider, just giving folks the alcohol, gambling, and nightlife the government was trying to stamp out.
But let's be real, that business was built on absolute brutality. His crew, the Chicago outfit, was in a constant bloody war with their rivals, especially the North Side Gang. This wasn't friendly competition. This was straight-up war for control of Chicago's streets.
And this is the central puzzle of Al Capone, isn't it? You have these two completely different images. On one side, he's playing the hero, this Robin Hood figure who opened one of the first soup kitchens to feed people during the Great Depression. But on the other side, his criminal record is a laundry list of violent crimes that just disappeared thanks to scared witnesses and bought-off officials.
For years, he actually got away with it. This whole double act worked. People were kind of willing to turn a blind eye. But then, one event, one single act of such shocking violence, changed the entire game.
It became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Imagine this. Capone's guys, dressed up like cops, walk into a garage used by their rivals, the North Side Gang. They have the guys line up against a wall and then just execute them with machine guns.
7. Just let that sink in. 7 men gunned down in a single morning. The public was absolutely horrified. This wasn't your typical gang hit. This was a flat-out massacre.
And just like that, his whole Robin Hood persona was completely shattered. The paper slapped a new title on him, Public Enemy #1. The public outcry was so loud, it reached all the way to the White House, where President Hoover himself ordered the feds to bring Al Capone down, no matter what it took.
Okay, so now the federal government is on the case, but they're running into the same old wall. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would dare testify against Al Capone. So, what do? How do you even begin to build a case?
They knew murder was a non-starter. They couldn't tie him directly to the bootlegging. I mean, the guy was a ghost in his own operation, smart enough to never put his name on anything. They had to get creative. They needed a totally new angle of attack.
And they found it in the most boring place imaginable, the tax code. See, there was a Supreme Court ruling in 1927 that basically said, hey, even if you make your money illegally, you still have to pay taxes on it. And this was a game changer. Suddenly, the government didn't have to prove he was a murderer. They just had to prove he was a tax cheat.
The strategy was just brilliant. With Hoover's order, they poured all their resources into this one idea. They didn't need witnesses to a murder. And then here's the kicker. Capone's own lawyers had made a huge mistake. They'd written letters to the government offering to settle his back taxes. And the feds pounced on those letters, using them as Capone's own admission that he had this massive income he'd never reported.
And it worked. It actually worked. In 1931, Al Capone was found guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. At the time, the longest sentence anyone had ever gotten for that crime. Just like that, at 33 years old, the reign was over.
So now we get to the final chapter. And Capone's end, well, it wasn't some blaze of glory. It was a slow, quiet fade to black.
At first, his prison time wasn't so bad. He had a pretty cushy furnished cell in Philadelphia. But the government wasn't having it. They wanted to crush his influence for good. So they sent him to the brand new supermax prison you couldn't escape from, Alcatraz. And there, stripped of his fancy suits, he wasn't the boss anymore. He was just inmate number 85.
And it was behind those bars that Capone really started to fall apart. His inmate file shows exactly why. Neurosyphilis, a disease he'd probably picked up years ago, was now just relentlessly attacking his brain. His mind was literally unraveling.
He got out after nearly 8 years, but he was a shell of his former self. He spent his last few years at his home in Florida, reportedly with the mental capacity of a young child. He died in 1947 at only 48 years old.
When you see his grave marker today, it's almost shocking how simple it is. For a man who was such a larger-than-life figure, there's no mention of Scarface or Public Enemy #1, just his name.
And that leaves us with this big, lingering question, right? Even now, decades later, we're still fascinated by Al Capone. He was a monster, a brutal killer, no doubt about it. But at the same time, a lot of people saw him as this kind of modern-day Robin Hood. So what do we make of a legacy that's equal parts monster and myth?